Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're going over the Gamemasters secrets for the Zweihander horror fantasy tabletop role-playing game, now on Kickstarter. As soon as my cat stopped meowing. 92 pages in total. We're not going to go through all of them because once again, the Secret of the Swanzi quick start adventure that comes along with this Kickstarter, and I don't want to spoil that. So there's going to be a couple different people who are playing through it, so you can catch that either on Twitch or on the Zweihander YouTube. Both are linked on Kickstarter page itself. So we've got running the game, your responsibilities, prep on how to do things, narrative themes, handling the session, how to handle skill tests, social interactions, combat, diseases, chaos manifestations, corruption, and then suggestions on how to handle horror overall as Zweihander starter set, a fantasy horror tabletop RPG. We're going to skip through the Secrets of the Swanzi stuff, so don't look at that. We'll put a little redacted box over here, just not to spoil anything. And then we're going to go through the expanded bestiary. We're also going to cover combat a little more that we did not do in the first video, right? That was just the overview, the player's guide, which is also up if we should need it. Right off the bat, you know, we said it a million times. We're going to say it again. Cool art. Running the game. So if you're reading this book, you're the GM or you want to be a GM, right? We talked about that in the last video, as in you want to start running games. It's a great book to start with. You should have a pretty good working knowledge of the player's guide, but you might be reading both of them at the same time, and that's fine too. If you so desire, you'll be ready to run the Secrets of the Swanzi adventure. This just goes over your responsibilities running Zweihander. You're the referee and not a competitor. You adjust rules when there isn't a clear outcome. Decide how the actions of the player characters, herefore known as PCs, drive the story forward. You're a narrator, not a puppet master. You set up the scenes and describe the world, the challenges for the PCs. The players decide how they want to do things. You describe the outcomes. You're supposed to be a fan of the players. This is a really important note. You should be encouraging them. The quote I like to use is, we're going to put them through hell to find out what they're made of. You let their actions drive and you determine consequences. You devise the stories, but let them chase down the things they're interested in. Sometimes the game will go in a different direction than you were expecting, and that can be a very good thing. This is a really interesting call out. I know we're skipping across, right? We should go down and then over. But when to say no is it's a tough one, right? Might have trouble doing that or feel like it's going to scare people off or that, you know, it shouldn't be their job, because yes and is a very powerful tool, but right, when to say no, you don't always have to consent to player demands. On the contrary, any world the PCs inhabit has to hold up to scrutiny, and actions must have consequences. Follow this guideline. If the idea is creative and fun, it would add to the story, but it may be outside their capabilities, impose a stiff difficulty rating, or a mechanical cost, as in the aforementioned fail forward consequences. Handling disagreements. I think a lot of the times you're playing with your friends, but storytelling doesn't always run smoothly. Sometimes these debates can turn into heated, they grind the game to a halt, or become passive aggressive. Stop the game and have a discussion with your players. Don't be afraid to time out, talk about what it is that people actually want to achieve, what they're trying to do, or perhaps why there is some confusion or frustration, as opposed to just assuming or thinking that you have to stay in the narrative to solve that. That may not be true, especially if it's a new group, right? Or even just a new game, unfamiliar with the rules, misunderstandings around keeping the game moving forwards. Rulings are far more important than rules. So really good tip. Focus on the player characters. You're going to keep track of the things that are happening as a game master. You should have your world kind of developing in the background and as a response to the things they do, but they are the heroes of the story, or they're at least the stars of it in a lot of cases for Zweihander. When in doubt, say yes. If possible, you should, because you should be a fan of them. Open to change and changing your narratives. Having them run roughshod over the adventure you worked on is not necessarily what we're suggesting here, but open to sort of improvising. My suggestion is always no prep is wasted. You can always take either the spirit of the idea that you had, right, or perhaps the monster stats you worked on, right? This interesting NPC they got one-shotted right out of the gate and didn't actually get there. You know, there's several lines of dialogue or their soliloquy. You can use them later. So instead of getting frustrated, bogging down the game, or becoming vindictive, just utilize that prep somewhere else in the adventure later on. Save yourself some time that way. Just want to give a special shout out to Dan Mandic for all of this amazing art that we see across all of the Zweihander, all of the Mangosh, all of the Flames of Freedom, basically everything that this team has been putting out. I actually don't remember. I think that I saw a post about it. It was over 1,000. I think it was actually over 1,200 unique pieces that Dan had made for the various books that have been out. So just wanted to include that because I've been complimenting it. One quick thing to go over before we get into handling the session and really what we would do when we start a game is to go over this particular piece right here. Grim attitudes. It's important to remind players that their PCs are not the arch-magi wizards and martial masters found in other games. This is one of the many ways that Zweihander sort of sticks out in otherwise, a pile of tabletop role-playing books. Right? Not only is their mortality at stake, but so is their psyche. There's no good and evil, just a dangerous balancing act between ego, id, that gnaws at the noble and deplorable alike. Again, it's reinforcing that the players are the ones driving the story. We are watching their story and their activities, but encourage them to make decisions that have lasting consequences. They should relish the moments that they succeed and drive back corruption, but it should also cost them. Perilous outcomes. Understand how you need to educate aspects of the game's healing system. There are rules for starvation, for falling, that only need to be referenced when required, but they're there, right? So it's part of the game. When used sparingly, they resonate more strongly with the player. So that's right. Not every time you hop down a 3-foot stool or whatever, when it is perilous, when it is perhaps grim and perilous. Interesting note here, right? The best kept secret is Zweihander is the rules are purposely deadly. It's an illusion. The reality is that while the game's mechanics may resemble Dark Souls, its deadliness is hidden behind carefully constructed math to ensure that the PCs survive most situations. I would say that's how most tabletop role-playing games, and really that's how most games are. Right, when we sit down in the movies, it's fun to get lost wondering what's going to happen, but we're really watching to see how they get through it, not if they will get through it. In most cases, you can always dial that up if that's what your players are looking for, especially the earlier games when the characters first start. That's when it's going to be the most deadly. Not only because they're new to their PCs, but also that is when, they are the most fragile. So when you start a session, right, when you begin, not only when you begin a campaign, but when you begin each individual session, each individual adventure, each night that you're playing, there's several steps that you want to take when you're ready. View your notes. You might want to do a recap, or sometimes you can convince your players to sort of do that for you, which is very exciting. And then follow these steps. So step 1 is, this is if anyone has any reward points, professional folio, or if you're not using that, just update your character sheet in general. You can update your trappings, just in case anything has been acquired or damaged, lost, stolen, etc. Roll for the starting fortune points. That's in chapter 2, playing the game of the player's guide, right? Everyone's going to roll fortune and build the fortune and misfortune pools to see what everyone kind of has available. To influence dice and rolls. And then we did not get too much into combat, right? The initiative ladder, you need to kind of control when things get into very one thing at a time, right? And you have to slow down the scene, right? So the initiative ladder can be used in a lot of different situations, but combat is certainly the most common. So everyone rolls a d10 and adds their initiative value from their profession folio or right, their character sheet. Someone, right, oftentimes the GM, but not necessarily, will record all outcomes ranked highest to lowest. Players decide on ties, which I like just right as a call out. Who decides when there's 2 matched numbers? The players decide if they want to go first or if they would like to acquiesce. And look at that, step 4. I got ahead of myself there earlier. Players participate in the previously on the Zweihander campaign, right? So players will recap what happened to them, encouraged to reference their notes, people's, places, and things. Did they make new friends, enemies? Did something momentous happen that led to new discoveries or revelations? Did they unearth a deadly secret? So this is really nice. I like this suggestion. I do typically try and get my players to recap, but I always add a couple pieces, but it's interesting to see what sticks out to them, right? You can learn a lot about the game you're running and about their particular motivations by hearing the things that stick out to them and they bring back up. When all of that is done, it's ready to begin. And now we'll just sort of look at that, ending a session. Everyone gains reward points, right? So they gain 100 RP. If it lasted for 4 hours or more, which is a pretty significant session of gameplay, give them 200 instead, which makes sense. Players spend RP and update professional folios, right, or their character sheets, if they have unlocked any new trappings, if they purchased anything, or indeed if they're spending it on skills or talents, etc. The GM is going to roll the d10 for corruption die. So we're going to go into this a little bit more later, but just very simply while we're right here, if through the course of the game you have 3 players, 2 of them have each gained 2 corruption, and 1 has gained 5, and on the d10 you roll a 4, only the person that gained that 5 corruption is actually going to mark 1 on their track. You should be budgeting for time for this, right? This is very important as part of like the safety tools to kind of check in at the end of the game, talk about the impact of their session. As it wraps up, go around the table, talk about how it impacted their PCs. Did any relationships change? Did they fail in a personal endeavor? Not everyone may have known or remembered, right? Been aware. Did the story lead to new understandings? Just a nice little note here about using the initiative ladder for things other than just combat. Certainly it shines there, but anytime when you switch from narrative time to like scene focused, anytime it's going to be useful to know exactly procedurally one after another. Additionally, I've never used this, so I want to try this people, places, and things. Best way to help players remember vital information is to record it on an index card, write down the most important clues as a title, hand it over, then instruct them to take notes on it. So this is very straightforward. I think it's a very powerful suggestion, is you're kind of saying as a GM, this is specifically what's important. This is the clue you were looking for. Here are the things, you know, it kind of snaps people back into like, okay, let's take notice on this. Sometimes just by the order of boxed text, people might put emphasis on the wrong thing or not understand what it is that's the most important object in the room, or clue that's been discovered. Whereas this is a powerful tool to just make sure that there's no misunderstanding and hand them a index card. So I think I'm going to try that. Additionally, it has notes for let players know which cards to keep and which ones to retire. So eventually, hey, you followed all that lead, right? Or their part of this in the story is done, which then immediately makes me think, well, maybe that wasn't entirely true, and you bring them back, but for a later time. Handling skill tests. As a GM, it's your job to determine how easy or challenging skill tests are. The difficulty rating chart will be the most common mechanic you'll refer to when running a Zweihander game. Consider these three factors, right? So distraction, would anything draw attention away from the task? Time, how much time does it take to complete this task? And tools, are the right tools on hand to do the task right? So right here, right, never test the primary attributes, right? Instead, you're doing the skills. So awareness instead of just perception, athletics instead of just brawn, coordination instead of agility. For feats of audio disconcernment, use eavesdrop instead of perception. So on and so forth. And then handling social interactions. I like this little chart too. This is a fun little one to just kind of pop up where you might need it. From helpful to hostile, right? And either a bonus to it or a arduous minus 30 to your roll. And then just the standard indifference. As I mentioned in the last video, a lot of times I'm buying tabletop books just to utilize their tables to fill out my world or to help my own prep. So having a chart full of motivations that I could just kind of drop in whenever I need is really exciting. I like both of these notes here. When not to track injuries and ending combat early. So tracking injuries for enemy combatants can slow the game down. Instead of recording injuries, simply allow the player to kill lesser foes whenever an injury occurs. But consider carefully the implications when using this for more powerful enemies. Your big bad shouldn't suddenly go down with a lucky hit, which I agree with. There's a moment where players would probably really enjoy that happening, but also could be a little underwhelming, so you'd want to balance that. Whether through a series of bad dice rolls from middle opponents or poor tactics, combat can sometimes drag out. Players aren't having fun or it gets boring, bring the scene to a close. Let the next attack be the killing blow against an enemy the PCs are fighting. Have the foes routed or they just give up, which can be interesting in its own right. Take some time after the session to assess what may have gone wrong and share those insights with the players, make adjustments. We talked quite a bit earlier about handling corruption in both the first video and this one. So corruption is usually accumulated during critical moments where PCs give in to negative emotions, selfishness, or in times of personal weakness. Examples include acts of criminality, unholy rites, violence, channeling, and the like. Creatures and NPCs never gain corruption. It's reserved for players only. The choices should be apparent to the players. Every session should include at least one situation where a player can achieve their goals with less than honorable actions. So you're sort of putting how badly do you want it, or how quickly do you want it? How much are you willing to work for it? How much are you willing to sacrifice? It's a good idea to forewarn players before they take actions that have dire emotional outcomes. It's a handy mechanic to reflect the grim and perilous world they live in, but you must be reasonable with how often they are gaining corruption. In most cases, you'll have at least one person in your group that is just dead set on getting corruption, and they will do lots of different things to try and get it. I would mind you to be wary of that and not just let them completely turn it on and just like, their cup runneth over with corruption. You'll run into that if you run into it. Use them too often or punitively, you'll hinder good role playing. When used sparingly and only at crucial moments, a PC's order or chaos alignment are at play, it will prove memorable, right? So this just has a list of corruptive offenses, minor, middling, or major offenses. So this list has been slimmed down a little bit from the last times, but I think it doesn't need to be an exhaustive list. Really anything where you can see they're willing to trade, right, or take the low road for what they want is worthy of something, and right, it scales up from there. So desecrating a tomb or a dead person, committing petty thievery or robbery, reading heretical or forbidden grimoires, minor chaos corruptions 1 to 3 per act, middling, which would be 4 to 6 corruption, crimes against others, serious harm, violation of sacred tenets. Also, when the PC suffers a serious injury, so that one can surprise you and you can end up with a decent amount of corruption just because it's such a shock to the system. Assaulting someone innocent, using physical or mental torture, implicating someone else for their crimes. Additionally, beyond taking a serious injury, simply becoming incapacitated on the peril condition track. And then finally, we have our major corruption offenses. When you get 7 to 9, right, basically guaranteeing that you're going to go up 1 in your chaos alignment. Major acts or offenses of trespass, generally soul corrupting, bordering on heresy. They should be rare. As I've mentioned in several of the games I've ran, someone just is right out of the gate trying to be chaos, desecrating a holy place, suffering a grievous injury, striking a bargain with a demon, which I've had happen, committing premeditated murder, and creating a powerful unholy artifact or relic. I would also say, right, getting their hands on one, trying to get one, right, stealing one from another person. But yeah, unholy artifacts, lots of fun. Corruption builds during a session. Look at our weird little fellow over here with his missing teeth. Corruption builds during a session and will pull PCs towards one of their alignments by the end, right? So either your order, after the first video, someone pointed out, right, this is the order alignment here, right, and then this is the chaos alignment over here. So there's pointing at each other each page, which I thought was really cool. And I didn't catch that at first. I saw the marginalia, but it didn't quite click. Corruption builds during a session, pulling them towards one of their alignments. The GM will roll a 1d10. It's simply a 1d10, right? And the effects will scar the PC, converting into chaos ranks if they right, I have indeed turned to chaos, or as they grow more resolute, right, and towards the order alignment. If the corruption die result is equal to or lesser than any corruption earned, they gain 1 chaos rank on their corruption tracker. If the corruption die is greater than any corruption earned, the player gains 1 order rank on their corruption tracker. If the player gains 0 corruption the entire session, let them choose to mark either 1 order or chaos. That's interesting. I don't remember that rule before. It's possible I just missed it beforehand. If a player gains more than 10 corruption in a session, they automatically gain 1, and they must also roll against the remainder. So if you get 14, right, corruption in a session, you automatically gain 1 chaos rank, and then against the GM's roll of a D10, you have a 4. So it's entirely possible to gain 2 or more chaos ranks in a single session. I think the most I have personally seen is 3, but as mentioned in the Zweihander Discords, there have been members who have seen 4. Once a player has gained 10 order ranks, they gain a fate point. Then they reset, right? 0 ranks on the corruption tracker. However, if they should gain 10 chaos ranks, they gain a drawback. So a player gains a drawback or 1 disorder from the core Zweihander experience. You and the player should work together to find a drawback that fits the story of the PC's struggle. After you agree, have them reset their chaos ranks back to 0 on the corruption tracker. Right, so it builds up to 10 in either direction, right? You could be at 7 but get to 10 chaos. You take your drawback, chaos goes back to 0, order stays at 7. Of note here, there are occasionally reasons that a player will always mark a chaos or an order rank when you do fill up your tracker, right, to that 10 in either direction. If you have ever received 1 permanently, that does not reset. So there are some situations where you may always start and may always have at least 1, if not more. So I also like this little section here just about handling horror, right, and what to deal with it. So it's got PCs thrust into horrific situations that test their resolve. There are 3 distinct brands of horror: stress, terror, and fear. So it kind of has ways in which you can pull on those strings and things you might do with them. Summon to witness the execution of someone. If they, for some reason, commit an act of cannibalism, perhaps they've been playing a Bethesda game, they have a conversation with someone they know who is dead, right? Can hear the beating of a heart within the darkness of a hallway. Trying to get a spot of blood out of their hand, and it is unable to do so. They inch along a cliffside so narrow falling could lead to death, etc. To withstand horror, PC faces a situation you feel would provoke either stress, fear, or terror. They make a resolve test depending on what type it is. Stress is challenging, which is a -10. Fear is hard, which is -20. And terror is arduous at -30. If successful, you withstand the effects. No other action needed at this time. If you fail, you suffer peril and gain corruption based upon the brand of horror, right? So stress is always going to be a D10 plus 1, fear 2D10 plus 2, and 6 corruption, terror 3D10 plus 3, and 9 corruption. If the PC should critically succeed this test, they provide emotional support for an ally, and the ally automatically succeeds. Critical failure, only do they deal with whatever's happening here, either stress, fear, or terror, the 1, 2, or 3D10, but they also suffer a despair. If you should reach incapacitated on your mental peril track, you suffer a despair from it. So here are a couple suggestions of some of the despairs, right? To fawn, right? All you can do is please those around you. Fight, right? And attempt to control a situation with domination and power. Flight, attempt to avoid conflict, believing they'll keeping their own head down will protect them. Freeze. So when you just withdraw and attempt to avoid people altogether. So these are all really great responses to just, a fear, a stress, a terror, whatever it may be. Finally, when a PC manages to live through a situation, a tough situation, or successfully face down a creature that triggers stress, fear, or terror, they can become hardened to it. At their option, a player will mark a keyword under drawback on their profession folio, communicating what it is they're hardened against. And then they mark a permanent chaos rank, which we discussed earlier on the corruption tracker. It's never removed or reset. You'll always start at that 1. As a result, when the PC is in a similar situation or facing similar creatures in the future, they can ignore the effects of the stress, fear, and terror that they would typically suffer from. So this is a very big risk versus reward. Is it worth it for you to always have that 1 chaos and step closer to these drawbacks and these despairs to be hardened against them? But it's a nice tool for kind of exerting some creative control over your PC. I really appreciate the way that the chapters are set up now, especially looking back and forth across the 2 books. Before, each chapter was kind of broken apart by a full page art, which was great art, as we've said many times. But this is also really helpful, just kind of know which section we're at. And as you're kind of flipping through the book or scanning through it, I mean, when it's digital, you can search pretty effectively without too much issues. But it's just nice that it says, hey, like, not only the art is very evocative and clearly kind of outlining what it is we're doing chapter over chapter, but right, chapter 5, combat and healing, back in the player's guide, right? Or chapter 3, the expanded bestiary. And just a handy little change I noticed as I was going through everything. So you're going to be using allies and foes, right, to kind of distinguish between your team and the opponent's team, or the multiple opponents. This outlines real quickly rounds and turns, right? So unlike the core Zweihander experience, the starter kit introduces rounds, which 1 round is the time it takes for everyone on the battlefield that is doing a thing to take their turn. Unless there is some extenuating circumstance, of course. And a round is always equal to a minute, regardless of how many allies and foes there are, because everyone's theoretically acting more or less simultaneously. We're just breaking it apart, right, to sort of understand the order of operations. Additionally, everyone during a turn has a set number of action points in their reserve AP hereafter, right? They begin their turn with 3, and then it refreshes. You can spend AP to use various actions in combat, categorized in 5 ways: movement actions, attack actions, perilous stunts, special actions, and reactions. So the first 4 you're doing more or less on your turn. There's probably a few special actions that don't, but then reactions specifically is off your turn, where you're either saving AP or you're spending some resource to get extra AP back to be able to do a thing. Using your AP in actions is how your PC participates or avoids the combat. You may spend your turn moving forwards or attacking a foe, binding a wound, shielding an ally, etc. And then there's ways to use, combine, or save your AP. Thinking outside of the box is what makes combat fun. We talked about the Fury dice beforehand, but whenever you have a Fury die, if you roll a 6 on the D6, right, which would be its highest face, it explodes, which is to say you roll another one. You can keep doing it, right? There is theoretically no upper limit to the number of Fury dice that can explode. You could hit a 6, and then a 6, and then a 4 and get 22 damage. I've seen it happen. It's very exciting. Fury dice are also expressed in combination with primary attribute bonuses, right? So you may see 2d6 plus CB, right? Combat bonus. So when you're dealing with combat, the GM is first going to determine if there's a surprise round, or if you want to let a fortune wheel decide, right? One player in the DM will roll d10. If both land on a 10, the party's the winning side, but the winning side decides if they want to escape or fight, which I like those rules a lot. There's a lot of games that are happening like digitally only, right? Everyone's kind of pressed for time. Getting stuck in a combat that may not have a lot of meaning can really just be a great way to spend the session doing nothing. Not that combat isn't fun and rolling dice is exciting, and that's why we're around the table, right? Digital or otherwise. But sometimes you just like, we're just trying to get something done. We escape. The winning side can flee without being seen, but it could impact the adventure progress. This is kind of where we said earlier in the video, right, where you don't just have to say yes all the time, or sometimes you need to say no as the GM, right? They can escape, but it might come back to haunt them later, right? Maybe this group teams up with another group, and now there's more enemies on the battlefield, more foes, next time. If you choose to fight, the winning side gains a free surprise round. Go to step 2. If you haven't already rolled initiative, roll it now, which is fine. You forget sometimes. This is also a nice little tip. Just says sometimes the environment might have secret elements, right? Or there may be a trap that has been laid that may happen. The GM will roll 2d10 plus 2 to determine its placement on the initiative ladder. So 3, the GM narratively describes the scene where the adventure and the action, and so to say the combat is taking place. Outline lighting and obscurement if they're going to impact anything. The GM determines placement of allies and foes. Generally dictated by the narrative. You can be using miniatures, right? So kind of get everyone self-situated. In many cases, I'll say, okay, you can be in this area, right? And kind of plot out a space, right? If everyone was going into the house, you're either, in the house, at the door, or right outside of it. You're probably not already upstairs, right? You're probably not in the apple grove on the left side. And then if applicable, the surprise round begins. Noted here, the winning side treats their actions in combat as easy, so they get a plus 20, and foes are defenseless to them. Winning side also adds another d6 to fury dice. Adds a d6 fury dice to damage. So there's a lot of, scroll down. There are a lot of reasons to want to win that surprise round. It is very favorable for you. Nice little note here about saving, right, or banking AP to be used as reactions. But when your turn comes up again, you start at 3. Anything banked is lost. So you can't build it up and have tons and tons. You're going to repeat right next round after next round until finally combat has ended. GM narrates what happens. Did everyone die? Did anyone escape? Right? Perhaps the party is indeed captured. It's up to the GM. The GM rewarding at the end of combat. Any remaining misfortune points that the GM hasn't used immediately transfer to the player's fortune pool. That's an interesting rule. I don't think I've caught that before. In this example, right, we've got Wilson Thornton wants to use 2 AP, right, to use the charge action, which is going to double their movement, give them an extra fury die, and then finally 1 action point to make a melee attack. So with your Zweihander, let's see, somewhere around 70. So with using your Zweihander core revised rule book, right? It's a simple melee. We're gonna use it 2-handed. We're gonna grab the whole thing. You're gonna be engaged and does a d6 plus your brawn bonus, right? And we're also charging, so we're getting an extra d6. So let's see. All right, so we got a 22. So we got a matched success, ironically. So it's identical to this, right? a crit success. So we're doing a d6 plus the brawn bonus, which is going to call 3, plus we're already getting 1 for the charge. And then we got, oh no, just 2. So close. But they could explode. And then what did the Zweihander actually do? Was it a d6 or a d? So the Zweihander revised core rulebook does a d6. Yeah, so we will roll, and then specifically the 2 fury dice could explode. Neither of them did. They were both 2s. And 3, our brawn bonus was 3 as well. So we did 10 damage with our critical attack charging with the Zweihander core revised rulebook. I'm just going to stare at the camera a moment, kind of brandish thusly towards the many combat conditions you could encounter, such as bleeding, choked, disarmed, stunned, helpless, hastened, low cover, intimidated, or inspired. Additionally, movement actions could be charge, get up, hustle, maneuver, run, or take cover. When attacking, you can take a called shot, cast your magic, melee attack, or ranged attack. Finally, your perilous stunts include chokehold, dirty tricks, disarm, stunning blow, sunder, and takedown. We'll quickly go over parrying or dodging, resisting, as well as suffering from damage, bleeding, and suffering peril and injuries. So, if you at any point parry or dodge, right, when hit by a weapon, but before damage is determined, you declare you want to dodge. If it's a ranged weapon, or parry a melee weapon, you make the relevant skill test in the brackets below, and if successful, you avoid all damage and the effects of the poison on weapons. So dodge is a coordination test, parry is a combat-based skill, and you test with the weapon you're armed with. If you should critically succeed, you bank 1 AP for free, so you could potentially do it again. You're punished for doing this, however, if you critical fail, because the foe would add another d6 fury die to the damage, and you cannot parry or dodge when defenseless. So, if the attacker's difficulty rating was hard, your defending it is actually easy. This is cool. So if things have already been made difficult for your attacker, or it's hard for you as the attacker, it's easier for them to dodge, which makes sense. And it's a good reason to do it. Whenever you're a victim of a perilous stunt, spell, or other talent that require you to resist their effects, resisting takes no AP, right? You must simply make the relevant skill test. If your turn comes up and you're still suffering from ongoing combat conditions or other effects, roll once to resist at the start of your turn. If successful, you shake all of them off as opposed to doing each of them individually. But if unsuccessful, you may attempt to resist again at the start of your next turn. Once again, if you critically succeed, you bank 1 AP for free. If you critically fail, you're defenseless in the beginning of your next turn, so it's very punishing. But, risk and reward. Once again, you cannot resist when defenseless. We'll slide on down to suffering, damage, and bleeding. Our earlier combat with the Zweihander revised rulebook, if 10 exceeded the base damage threshold of the foe we were attacking, you'd move them 1 step down the damage condition track negatively. If it exceeds 6 plus that damage threshold, move 2, 12, 3, and 18, right? So no way that happened. Same for the 6 the 12 or the 18. But if you did, they would instantly be slain, right? So the condition track, which I can put below, scales with how much damage. You announce aloud where you're at in the damage condition track. If you remain unharmed or lightly wounded, there's nothing else to record. However, if you move to moderately, seriously, or grievously wounded, you could also suffer an injury, and you roll d6s according to that. And if you are a PC and you are slain at any point, you can sacrifice a fate point to instead live. If you suffer a moderate, serious, or grievous injury, you can draw from the injury card deck, or the GM can just roll a d100 and check the random injury chart. Suffering peril follows the same, not the identical track, but a similar track, in the same way. You're either tracking physical peril or mental peril, right? And once again, if you exceed the base peril threshold, you move once down the peril condition track negatively, and the same scale. So 6, 12, and 18, right? However, when you exceed 18 plus your peril threshold, you are not slain, you are instead incapacitated instantly. And at that point, you're gaining 6 corruption. Interestingly, as you move through the peril threshold negatively, you ignore 1 skill rank in skills you have, 2 or 3 with how far down the condition track you are. So it makes it more and more difficult to succeed at the skills you are attempting. Bleeding is a combat condition, right? You bleed every minute at the beginning of your turn. If you bleed for a number of minutes in excess of your brawn bonus, you're slain. And then go down to bleeding here. Bleed every minute at the beginning of your turn, right? You bleed for a number of minutes in excess to your brawn bonus, you're slain. We just covered that. So specifically, your allies may be attempting to stem the bleeding, right, or heal the bleeding. So the many actions they can do to heal your wounds, right? Binding wounds, using laudanum, right? Healing, treating infections or injuries, performing surgery. They may stem the bleeding, which is to say, spend a bandage and a minute in combat, 3 AP, all of them for your turn, theoretically, and attempt to stop that bleed. You can also, if you don't have the bandage, you can attempt to cauterize it with fire instead. However, the person will suffer 3d10 plus 3 physical peril and fall unconscious for 1 hour after the cauterization. In addition, you cannot recover your damage in peril condition tracks until you have undergone stem bleeding, right? It just stops it for a while. One of the other actions that'll come up a lot is the use of smelling salts. As long as you have them, you can take a minute, 1 AP in combat, and use them on your ally. The effect is whoever just got to smell the salts moves up in the peril condition positively, but gains 1 corruption. And the other limitation here is that smelling salts can only be utilized on anyone once every 24 hours. Finally, there's just good old sleep. And as we say, sleeping or naps don't cure stab wounds. However, you recover your peril condition track to the unhindered if in a safe place, and periled if in an unsafe place. And the GM kind of decides if this place is safe or not. As we just go through the expanded bestiary here, we've got some classifications, right? So abyssal, animal, beast, humanoid, mutant, and supernatural, right? Which is to say creatures from other worlds, mundane wilderness creatures, predators found in the wildlands, humanoid, the most dangerous animal, truly. Mutant, which is creatures touched by corruption, and supernatural, the forgotten and cursed. So you're going to see a lot of this stuff is very straightforward, familiar terms that you would have already seen while either making your character, right, or helping make your players' characters. So they've got attributes, skill ranks. They do have risk factor, which is interesting, right? Basic, intermediate, and advanced tier ranks PCs. The risk factors are basic, intermediate, and advanced. A subcategory called notches for low, medium, high, and unique. Interesting little, right? It's a little combat or challenge rating esque, but the idea of trying to balance a combat, balance a fight, which is helpful. The attack profile will detail the weapons in melee, engaged, or ranged that the foe may have. Base chance of succeeding, right? Before any difficulty rating may be added in. Their size, their damage, their qualities, trappings if necessary, spell use if necessary, right? So just a cauldron of bats, different things it can do. I love human monsters included. I use them a lot, right? Because your constable, right? First off, that's just a job, right? Maybe not a profession, right? In the strictest sense, right? But a job that may exist in your world and the players can encounter, right? But you could have, right, a freebooter, a full C ascetic, a full C leader, right? Full C patrician, a guildsman, right? Being the antagonist for your adventure, right? So having their stats is really nice. A good old mastiff, right? A doggo. So there should be instead of dog pelt, this should say dog pet, so you can pet the dog. Very important. A muse, the refugee, Vale Wolf. So as we got through here a little bit, just a common villager, which is nice. The Walking Dead. Thank you for this art. I love it. We're gonna use this as a token. This is the one that stopped me dead in my tracks. So I did flip through this real quickly before we started recording. Apologize, you didn't get my first reaction. There's your were-yak, in case you need a were-yak. And let me be very clear, you need a were-yak in your adventures. I just wanted on the record that I'm going to be looking forward to supplemental rules that allow one to become a were-yak and perhaps other were creatures. Looking through the stats block real quick, I don't see that as an option quite yet, but I trust that the powers that be will certainly have something for us coming soon. Wrappings, ripped clothing, and signs of their former human self. That's how you do tragedy. We've got our Witchhammer Acolyte, right, with their flintlock pistol. Very exciting. Witchhammer Fanatic. Fantastic art. I would play both of them happily any day of the week. And then it rolls into some of the creature's traits. Just what it is they do. One could perhaps be Lucky Duck. Oh, well, there it is right there. I wonder if we'll have rules for gaining the lycanthropic trait phenomena. Sound of my voice. Yeah, these are really cool. I like all of these. To rest, man, they're so evocative, right? Like, just having, I would just randomly generate a couple monsters and having, right, sneaky and resist to corruption, right, would make you a great witchhammer fanatic. Then being well, I choose you, well, perhaps you're gonna catch them all. That pretty much knocks out everything I was looking to do. Right, we've got some injuries near the back of the book, and then it goes into notes, right, just for you personally. So just wanted to say thank you, right, first off, to Daniel and James for putting together an excellent book and an excellent adventure from the parts of it that I've watched so far and the little bit I've read. Didn't want to spoil anything, so you will not find too many details of the Secret of the Swanzi in this book, but you can look forward to several iterations of that adventure being ran by a few different GMs. As mentioned before on both the Zweihander Twitch and Zweihander YouTube. Really, and we'll go back to the top, right? Just want to shout out everyone on this team. Editors, contributors, special thanks, lead playtesters, right? Our art, our illustration, our cartography, editing, production manager. We've got everybody here that, right, played an instrumental part of bringing a new iteration of Zweihander, right? A lean iteration, right, with its quick start rules, with its slimmed down from 400 600 pages depending on which edition, which pages you're counting and dealing with, right, into like a slim 99 and 92 page book. And really, yeah, thank you to everyone at Andrews McNeil Universal for allowing everybody to sort of get their hand in here, right, and be part of a really great production. So good luck to you on your adventures, right, in this grim and perilous world. I hope horror treats you well. Thanks.